Welcome to Breaking the Underdog Curse for Chiropractors. I'm your host, Dr. Don MacDonald, author of the best-selling book, The Underdog Curse. We give Vitalistic chiropractors a chance to learn from the best around the world, discovering how they overcame their challenges and achieved success. In order for chiropractic to thrive, we must have thriving chiropractors. Now listen up, it's time to crush the curse. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Breaking the Underdog Curse for Chiropractors. Today, I get to go to Germany. I've been all over the world. I get to go to Germany and see my buddy, my fellow Palmer grad, who we graduated from the same school. We're around the same time. I don't think we met each other at the time, but we have the same friends.
No, you're older than I am, Don. You graduated before me.
I was ahead in the class. Yes. But we've ran into each other like different parts around the world and in Scotland, and we were just recently in Chiro Europe, and he did an amazing talk at Chiro Europe and had everybody jumping up and down, even though that he lost his voice and he was like kind of sounded a little bit like squeaky.
Well, thanks for that.
But it was a very manly squeaky, so it was good. So,
totally.
Dr. Danny Constable from Germany, welcome to the podcast, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. It's good to see you, Don Mac.
Yes.
Like you said, it's been a while. I think you graduated at the end of my first or second try. So I actually did see you and knew your face and knew who you were because, you were like the kingpin on campus back then. And then, as things go, we sort of lost sight of one another or lost contact or whatever. And then a few years ago, we saw each other at the Edinburgh lectures in Edinburgh as well.
Yeah.
And that was great catching up with you. And then just recently here in April at Chiro Europe here in Malaga, I caught up with you and Brandy. It was great to see you guys again as well.
When it's always great to be on an airplane and then just see somebody like 4 rows down and going,
That's right. Because you guys got it connected through Frankfurt. And then because I live just near Frankfurt, I got my flight from Frankfurt. That's right. And I was walking down the aisle and I saw you two guys just passing out in your seats there. That's right.
Yeah, I just had a little jet lag going on, but that was good to get us a little sparked up, getting ready for
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's right. Because you guys were Chiro Europe rookies, right?
Yeah, it was. That was an amazing event. It was like so much, and you prepped us for it too. You said how good it was, and so I'd heard about it before, but never been there. So, how many have you been to?
I haven't been to all of them. I've only been going for the last sort of, I suppose, 4 or 5 years. So it might be like my 5th or 6th, because they happen twice a year in April and October every year, and they've been going, I think, for 12, 13, 14 years now, I believe.
Yeah.
But I kind of only cottoned onto it after sort of my shift took place, from working in a mechanistic pain-based model before I made my shift into that vitalistic model. So really only when that sort of happened to me, I cottoned onto them and found out about them, and then went there and totally fell in love with the event and with the people who run it, Dr. Hudson and his wife, Lynn McAvania. And have been making it at least once a year part of my program every year because I just love it, and it's a great way to get dipped again here in Europe without having to go back to the States. Yeah,
that's awesome. Well, we'll get into that shift because we're all about the shifts, baby. Getting people into the vitalistic model, get us into the cool group.
Yep, hang out with the cool kids. There you go.
Yeah, exactly. But what I always like to do is just go back to like the very beginning. Like how did you get into this crazy profession in the first place?
Dude, I got into chiropractic because I got adjusted, and basically, I mean, growing up in Melbourne in Australia, we play a pretty rough and tumble kind of sport called Aussie rules football or Australian rules football. At least we do in the part of Australia where I come from, in Melbourne and the southeast, and it's a pretty physical kind of game. And we have like underage competition, of course, and then when you turn sort of 18, 19, you sort of go and play with the big boys, go and play with the men. But the club where I played at the time, I was never really big and muscular and strong, but I was always pretty quick, could run pretty fast, and had pretty good ball skills. Oh, that sounds funny saying that now. So like at the age of 15, I had the chance of playing with the big boys, which was great for my ego, but it was an absolute disaster for my body. And after the first handful of games, I was just, a physical wreck, and I wasn't spending my time on the training track anymore. I was spending my weeks in the medical room just trying to get up and get fit for the next day or for the next game, and that just wasn't happening for me. And the club that I was at was a pretty good club, so we had a pretty good medical department. And like I said, they were patching me up week to week, but it wasn't really doing anything for me. And then the father of a player colleague of mine said, "Look, I don't know if he can help you, but go and check out this guy." And he gave me a business card of a guy named Dr. Jeff Long, who is a chiropractor in Croydon in Melbourne, where I come from. And I looked up just recently, actually, to see if he's still about, and lo and behold, he is. He's actually still in practice. And
that's cool.
And I'm talking about, I was 15, I'm now 41, so we're talking about 26 years ago. And I thought he was an old man then. But look, I can't tell you how old he is or how long he's been in practice, because it's a beautiful example of, you never know how far-reaching, the things you think, say, or do today will change the lives of millions tomorrow. Because to be honest, I was really only a handful of times there, but that handful of times totally changed my worldview and turned me on to chiropractic. And straight away, I knew that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to help as many people as I possibly could, the way that this guy helped me. And that's why the rest of my schooling and the rest of my time in Melbourne was dedicated to getting my backside into chiropractic school. And we do have a school in Melbourne, the RMIT, the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology. And interestingly enough, because in the prep for this podcast, you said, sometimes people like hearing hard luck stories, obstacles that people have overcome. Because I applied to get into RMIT at school, dedicating the last sort of 2 or 3 years of my high school life to do everything I needed to do to get in there. And at the time, it was like a 3-part process. And it was based on your grades coming out of high school. It was based on a paper that you wrote about chiropractic, or why you would make a great chiropractor, or why you would be a great addition to the chiropractic profession. And then an interview on a 3-headed panel. And that 3-headed panel constituted a field doctor, a staff doctor, and a 5th-year chiro student. And so coming out of high school, my grades were pretty good. My majors in high school were English and English literature. Both of my parents were English teachers, so I wrote a pretty kick-ass essay, if I may say so. And my interview went pretty well. I've always been a guy who's been pretty good with the gift of the gab, and the interview went pretty well. So I was pretty shattered when 6 weeks later I got notification that I didn't get accepted. But I was kind of, an athlete. I don't want to, go over the top or whatever, but I played, sport my entire life. I understood the concept about working your way through the ranks and earning your stripes and things like that. So I knew that about 1,500 applicants applied for about 45, 50 positions in the course. So I thought, okay, well, it's possible that there are better candidates than I am. And, I'll just put my head down and my bum up, and I'll work hard this year at uni, and I'll do something else, and I'll reapply next year. Mm-hmm. And I did just that. I worked my ass off that year at university. I did a parallel course to the chiropractic course of study on campus, and we actually had quite a number of common courses with the chiro students. And during that year, I was thinking, what's going on? Because a few of these people in the chiropractic course, they were odd characters, to say the least, and I thought, okay, but maybe they're super smart or super good, or whatever they happen to be. And so, I got, to translate it for North American audiences, I suppose, I got like a 4.0 in my, that first year at university. And again, I wrote another kick-ass essay, and my interview went really, really, really well. And as fate should be, at the 5th-year student on my interview of the second year was the girlfriend of my high school sport teacher. Oh. And so I had a bit of an insider onto that panel. And so you can imagine how shattered I was when, again, 6 weeks later, I got the letter that I hadn't been accepted again for the second year in a row. And I called up this bird and I said, what's going on? Because, I thought the interview was great. And she said, yeah, you were our easiest, our best interviewee. And I thought my paper was pretty good. And she said, dude, we gave you a 9.5 out of 10 for your paper. And, I got a 4.0 in my year at uni. What's going on? And she said, look, I don't know. You were easily our best candidate this year, and I can't tell you, I don't know.
Wow.
And so, not taking no for an answer, I went to the university campus, to the matriculation office, or to the head of the chiropractic school. And, not mentioning any names, but, he was a pretty well-known Dutch guy in the chiropractic profession at the time in Australia. And I said, very politely, because I was, I was 18 or 19 at the time. And I said, look, my name's Danny Constable, and I've just been not accepted into the chiropractic course for the second year in a row. I'm wondering, is there anything that you could tell me, give me some tips how I can improve my chances of being accepted and becoming a chiropractic student? And he asked me, well, what course are you doing? And I said, well, physical education and human movement. And he said, where? And I said, well, here on campus. And he said, how long is that course of study? Knowing very well how long that course of study is. And I said, well, it's 4 years. And he said, how many years have you done? And I said, well, I've just started my second year because I didn't get into chiropractic school. And he said, well, I suggest you finish your course of studies and then reapply. And I said, so complete the 4 years of study and then reapply. And he goes, yes, that's right. And I said, and then do the full 5 years of chiropractic school. And he said, yes, that's what I'm suggesting. And I said, well, 9 years to become a chiropractor. And he said, well, that's my recommendation, yeah. And, like I said, I was 18 at the time, so 9 years is half of my life.
Yeah.
9 years for an 18-year-old guy is a massive amount of time. And so I was pretty dejected at that. And I turned around and I left his office. And just as I got to the door of his office, and I'll never forget this guy's voice. I can still hear this guy's voice with this, silly little Dutch accent in my head. And he said, and I quote, I guess we'll really test your commitment to the profession now, won't we? And that was the last thing he said to me as I left his office. And like I said, for an 18-year-old kid, it was just like a dagger in the back as I left that guy's office. And so I marched across campus and I went to the matriculation office and I dematriculated. I left college or university right there on the spot. I was just smashed and went home and hit the bottle and got smashed. Smashed. And ended up getting a job in the mail room of the Melbourne Waterworks. And so my life went from, very studious, nerdy, academic, to, spending 5 days of the week in the basement of the Melbourne Waterworks in the mail room, training for football 2 or 3 nights a week, playing football once a week, and, getting smashed most nights. And that became, my weekly routine.
Wow.
And then going back to the 5th year student on my panel, who was the girlfriend of my high school teacher, that high school sport teacher, who's also now a chiropractor, by the way, a guy named Dr. Peter Goodman in country Victoria in Australia. G'day, Pete, if you're listening. He said, look, why don't you try Palmer? And I said, well, what's Palmer? And he said, well, it's the fountainhead of chiropractic. It's the original school of chiropractic. And at the time, in the middle 90s, still regarded as the best chiropractic college in the world. And I said, well, come on, Peter, if RMIT's not going to take me, why in the hell would Palmer, the fountainhead, want to take me? Forget it, leave me alone. And Peter just wouldn't stop leaving me alone. And in the end, what he did, he actually got Palmer to send me an application form. And so out of the blue in the post, I got an application form for Palmer. And I knew where it had come from. And I literally put my RMIT application with it actually had like a denied stamp on this application. And I put it in the envelope and I sent it off just to shut Peter up. And my life continued, training football, working in the mailroom, getting smashed most nights. And then a few weeks later, 6 weeks later, 8 weeks later, I'm not sure how long it was now, I got this letter from Palmer and I'd totally forgotten it. And I opened up this letter, totally not expecting what to be reading. And it said, dear Mr. Constable, we're pleased to inform you that we are prepared to offer you a full academic scholarship to Palmer College of Chiropractic, Davenport, Iowa. We're expecting you here on the 1st of January, which was in about 4 weeks' time. So that turned my head, turned my world on its head overnight.
Wow.
Yeah, and then 4 weeks later, I was in Davenport, Iowa on the 1st of January. Yeah. So that's how I got into Palmer and got into chiropractic.
So that's really cool. And I always like this because I always remember my first day going to Palmer. I came off the plane in the old days without having any place to stay, just 2 hockey bags full of clothes, and then just kind of went to the school. What was your first impression of Palmer? Well,
I actually went over with my old man. My old man came over with me because I'm an only child and I had a good relationship with my dad. We were, best of mates, I suppose. And he, like I said, I just turned 19. I turned 19 on the 29th of December. and we left Melbourne on the 31st of December. And, being in the Southern Hemisphere, it was, high summer. And I remember the day vividly. We left in like 39 degrees heat, for the North Americans, translate that into Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
It was hot. And we flew over and we landed in Chicago on the 1st of January. So we got off the plane in Chicago and we thought, well, what the hell is this? Yeah. And before I left Melbourne, I knew that, the Midwest was cold and all that kind of stuff. So I went to like this winter outdoor supply store in Melbourne. I said, look, I need your thickest winter jacket. I'm going to America and I need your thickest jacket. And the guy goes, yeah, I've got just the thing for you. And he gave me like this jacket. And it was like the thickest jacket I'd ever seen in my entire life. But like I said, we're talking about the middle 90s here. And I was really proud of this jacket. So we got into the hotel and we stayed the night in Chicago before we went down to Davenport the next day. And, it was the high year of like the Bulls, the Chicago Bulls.
Yeah.
Michael Jordan was huge in Australia. And, I was in the town of Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls and the Miracle Mile and Michigan Avenue. And, we've got to walk down Michigan Avenue and look at the Miracle Mile. And so I walk out of the hotel with, my big winter jacket on. And it's the 1st of January and, the Windy City is not called the Windy City for nothing. And so we get out of the hotel and walk down Michigan Avenue towards town. And we got about 150 meters down that street. And we both looked at each other and said, screw this, we're going back to the hotel. And it was just brutal. So I didn't see Chicago that weekend. But the next day we headed out to Palmer. And as you know, Davenport, Iowa in January is like the last place on earth you want to be. And it was grey and wet and white. And I'd never seen snow in my entire life until I'd gone to Davenport. And so we got to like this apartment, like this like halfway house that had been arranged for us to meet up on our first day. And the snow was like halfway up the front door. Yeah. And I was like, what the hell is going on? Yeah. And so we got like pretty quickly the winter blues, like overnight. We were jet lagged and everything was just shit. And my parents were separated and were divorced at the time. And, my parents didn't speak to each other. And so the next day I went off to Scott Community College because I had to do like a couple of prereqs before I went to started Palmer then in that second trimester. And like I said, my parents don't speak. Yeah. But I found out later that my dad called my mum that day while I'd gone to Scott and said, look, he's not doing good. He's totally down. He's totally depressed. The weather's on top of him. It's a nightmare. I don't think this is going to happen. I think I'm going to be getting on the plane with him. I think we're going to have to bring him home. I think it's all over. And I tell the story. I came back that afternoon, like while Dad was still on the phone talking to Mum, and I came back with 2 German birds, one on the right, one on the left. Yeah. And I walked in the front door, and Dad's on the phone, just goes, forget it. He'll be right. See you later. Because like on my first day at school, I met these 2 lovely German girls, and we'd hit it off straight away as 3 international students, and sort of we'd happen to be staying at the same apartment complex and all that kind of stuff. So I got a ride with them back to the apartment complex, and so I sort of made 2 friends on the first day, and that was it. And Dad said, "Okay, well he'll be fine," and I was. So that was good.
That's awesome. So you graduated, and how did you like? How was your experience at Palmer, just in general? Like how did you like school?
I appreciate it more now that I'm gone.
Yeah.
And quite often I've been asked that question, and at the time, to be honest, I think I was probably too young.
Mm-hmm.
I got there when I just turned 19. I graduated when I was 23. And looking back on it, for me and my own personal and spiritual and emotional development, I was probably too young. I got through school. I graduated magna cum laude. I kept my academic scholarship throughout school. I was a pretty good student. I was good at regurgitating things for exams. Mm-hmm. But I don't think I really appreciated the education that I got at the time. I think so that middle to late 90s, because I graduated in October 2000, so I was there from 96 till 2000. And, the education that you got there was still a chiropractic education. The president at the time was, as you know, was Virgil, Dr. Virgil Strang. He passed away while I was in second trimester, and then his replacement was Dr. Guy Reekman. So
that's not too bad.
I think under Dr. Strang and Dr. Reekman, you can be assured that you get a pretty good chiropractic education. But I didn't appreciate it at the time. I mean, I appreciated things like West Hall and seeing all the names of the old timers and those old benches in the halls with all these old timers' names engraved by the old timers themselves into those wooden benches. And I soaked up that atmosphere because I've always been a bit of a history buff and things like that. I love that, but looking back, and I think I probably could have learned a lot more and got a lot more out of it than what I actually did. But like I said, I played the game. I got out of there. I graduated and I got a license, and we've been going strong ever since.
That's awesome. Well, that's just like me too. But again, we all have a journey, right? So we all come around at different times. So there's always, if there's any students out there and they're not getting what they want out of it, there's always hope for you, right? Because look at both of us. We did pretty good, and we weren't I wasn't even that great of a student, and I didn't get that much from it. I was there for because you were there for Centennial. Were you there for Centennial?
No, that was in 95. I got there in 96.
That's right. So because when I was there for Centennial, people were like, "Oh, that was great. Did you go see all the people?" And I'm like, "Actually, I didn't go to one seminar, but I went to every social event."
There you go.
I went to all the parties, but I didn't go to actually.
The speakers. And that's sometimes it's sometimes the way that it is when you're a kid, I suppose. I mean, I'm now in practice in my 18th year in practice, and I see some guys come out of school nowadays who are just like I was, as a stupid kid who still doesn't know the difference between, their ass and their elbow. But, then there are other kids that just go through school totally focused, totally, totally on fire. And they come out of school, like out of the starting blocks, and they go from like 0 to 100 miles an hour, like quick, smart. And chapeau to them. I have all the respect in the world for them. But, like you said, everyone's on their own journey and everyone has their own pace, and everyone's, at that position on their journey that they're meant to be, and that's okay.
Yeah. Now, and I want to ask for everybody else, because I asked you when we were talking in Malaga, but how did you decide to go to Germany from getting out of school? So being from Australia.
Easy. That's very easy. A 4-letter word, man. LOVE, love.
Yeah. Those darn girls.
Well, exactly right. Well, one of those 2 German girls that I brought home on my first day, at some stage became my girlfriend. And so we were girlfriend, boyfriend going through Parma. You were still together at graduation. And it was actually also another funny story because it got to the week of, like literally the week of graduation. And we'd both finished our clinic numbers and both kind of packing up. And we were literally sitting on the couch in our apartment on West 13th Street. And we're having this, this dead serious heart-to-heart conversation. So, okay, what are we going to do? We're here in America. You're a German. I'm an Aussie. We're like 3 days away from graduation. We've never spoken about this before. Are we both going to go to Germany? Are we both going to go to Australia? Are we both going to stay here in the States? Are you going to go to Germany and I'm going to go to Australia? What are we going to do? And literally while we're having this conversation, the phone rings. And it's this guy in Germany, this chiropractor in Germany, and I happen to pick up the phone. And he said, well, hello, my name's so-and-so. I'm calling from Germany. I have a big practice here in Germany. We're 7 chiropractors. And I'm having 2 people leave me next month. And I heard that you guys are graduating this month. I'd like to offer you guys a job. And, me being the cocky 23-year-old kid that I was, I wanted to, play hard to get. So I thought, well, I'll have to speak about it and think about it. We'll call you back. And so I hung up and we spoke about it, and it was pretty clear. We went, oh, do you want to? And I said, do you want to? And I said, okay. And, like I said, I was 23 at the time. I had no other plans. I had no possessions. I had no money. I thought, I'll do that for a couple of years and see what happens. So literally like 3 minutes later, me playing hard to get, hello, it's me again. Yeah, we'll take it. And so like we graduated on Friday, the 27th of October, 2000. And we were in Germany on the 1st of November, and I saw my first patient on the 3rd of November, 2000, not being able to speak a word of German. So that's how I ended up in Germany.
Wow. Yeah. And that, I was talking to you about how just imagine graduating, Because then, you just have that confidence issue because you're used to almost paying people to see you in student clinic, right? Just to get your numbers, and you're paying to see people basically to actually collect.
Yeah.
And then also not being able to speak the language at the same time. So like, how did that go for you? Like, how long did it take to learn German?
Well, that was pretty interesting. And like, now that I dislike this part about it, but at the time it was really beneficial because the Germans are quite animated about their health now, or about their sickness, depending on how you look at it. Mm-hmm. So, for example, the German in a case history will not sit there still and look at you and say, well, I've got this neck pain which goes then into my left shoulder, and when I lift up my shoulder or when I flex my fingers, the pain shoots down to my little finger. And you guys listen to the audio, you can't see this, but what happens is they'll come in and they'll touch everything and they'll show everything. So they'll come in and say, I've got like this neck pain here, and it goes down here into my shoulder. When I lift up my arm, it shoots down here into my little finger like this. And they'll get up and dance like their symptoms for you. And so, the first sort of 3 or 4 weeks, I literally sort of sat there and looked and wrote and looked and wrote and looked and wrote.
It's like charades. It's like charades, sort of.
It was exactly charades. And, me not understanding the damn word. And, but, we got by and that was okay. And I still remember these two people. There were two people in that sort of those first few weeks or those first couple of months who went to my boss after their case history, and they said, look, sorry, I can't stay with this kid because one, he's way too young. He can't possibly know anything being as young as he is. And, I have the feeling he doesn't understand me. Yeah. And, well, that was true because I didn't understand him at all. But, in the end, chiropractic, I suppose, is somewhat of an international language because they were the only two. And I was in that office for 3.5 years, and they were the only two that ever left me. So that was okay.
Cool.
It was a very steep learning curve, but it was good.
So let's fast forward. You said you were there for 2 or 3 years,
mm-hmm.
and so then what happened? Because you're basically associate, right?
Well, I was there for about 3.5 years.
Yeah,
and then and I went over on a deal as like an independent contractor.
Yeah,
and that started to become a bit of a grey area in German law, and what actually happened was the state level, it's really difficult for me to translate into English, but basically the state level governing body of healthcare professions investigated a practice where I was. Mm-hmm. And they found out that it's a situation called Scheinselbstständigkeit, which basically is like...
Oh, I totally get that.
Okay, yeah. It's basically like pseudo-independent contractors. Right. Basically, they charge you as being an employee, but acting as an independent contractor. And that's involved with, all different kinds of social security and insurance payments and back payments and the whole deal. Right. So there was a court case about that, and that was sort of settled out of court. And luckily, I won that court case, or won that settlement out of court. And because of that court case back in 2003, chiropractic was declared an independent contractor or a self-employed profession. And basically their deal was, because people used to come over to Germany saying, well, I'm going to work under the license of an established chiropractor. Right. And it was a practice that was done for years and years and years and years and years. And me being, a naive 23-year-old, I bought it and I went for it. But in actual fact, it was a very legal grey area. And, that sort of started to come up and people got in like quite a bit of trouble about it. And, I was one of those targets. But because of that, they basically said, we've decided that chiropractic is a self-employed profession, and there is such thing as an independent contractor, because there is no way that the lead chiropractor can be with the second tier chiropractor, with the associate chiropractor, with the secondary chiropractor all of the time. Basically, the chiropractor needs to make his own clinical decisions based on his clinical findings and his clinical observations in that moment, at that time, with that patient. And because of that, it's obviously a self-employed individual professional situation. And I've still got that piece of paper and that declaration. But unfortunately, there are still people today who get picked up for working under that law and are getting in big trouble with big fines, unfortunately. But, they'll learn at some stage.
And maybe
so, people sort of, yeah.
Oh no, I was just going to say maybe just describe for some of the listeners out there because chiropractic is kind of you're explaining it to us before how you're kind of grouped with like naturopaths and acupuncturists. Like
Right.
just maybe explain how it's how you're regulated.
Yeah. Well, in Germany, healthcare is kind of divided, or the practice of healthcare professions is kind of divided into two camps. Yeah, and there's a fence down the middle. On the one side of the fence, there's the medical profession. So anything that we Western people consider the medical profession, and then on the other side, everything is lumped under the umbrella of Heilpraktiker. And Heilpraktiker, literally translated, means healing practitioner. So you're either a Western medical person or you're a Heilpraktiker. So under Heilpraktiker are the things like you said, naturopaths, homeopaths, physical therapists, acupuncturists, and including osteopaths and chiropractors. And so the story goes back way back into the 30s. The first sort of German guy who went to Parma, graduated, and came back to Germany was in the 1930s, and he opened up a practice in Berlin. And being the only chiropractor in all of Germany, he very quickly had a very large practice. And just like what happened in the States, he drew a bit of attention to himself, and he was charged with practicing medicine without a license.
Yeah.
And he literally, as it was in the 1930s in America as well, he used BJ's defense and said, well, I'm not practicing medicine, I'm practicing chiropractic. And the judge agreed with him, but legally didn't know what to do with him. So he said, look, can you please take the Heilpraktiker exam, and we'll let you work as a Heilpraktiker. And he did, and since then, we've been working under the Chiropractic law from 1939 because of that same case. So,
Wow.
basically, but in reality, it's kind of like a national board, and it's got nothing to do with chiropractic.
Yeah.
But from what I hear, a lot of national boards don't have much to do with chiropractic.
I don't think I've seen one national board that has much
There you
to do
go.
with chiropractic.
And so when people sort of come over here, they sort of say, oh, well, look, can I work without speaking German? Can I work without the Heilpraktiker exam? I said, look, do yourself and everyone else a favor, do the exam, pass the exam, and then practice conscientiously, and everything will just be fine.
Mm-hmm.
In reality, there are no real shortcuts. You know what I mean? You sit down, you study hard, you take the test, you pass the test, end of story. And the test is depending on where you do it, because it's not even state to state different. It's county to county different, or district to district different. It's mine, for example, was 100 multiple choice questions, and if you passed, I think it was either 70 or 75% was the pass grade. You got let through to an oral exam, which was in front of a medical doctor, a field doctor, and a field Heilpraktiker, and they just drilled you with questions until they either like you or they don't. And when you pass both those parts of that exam, you're given your license, and you're allowed to do your thing. And interestingly enough, according to the Chiropractic law, you can do almost anything, up to and including minor surgery. So it's when you actually look at it, it's a mind-blowing law. It's a mind-blowing system. But it's been working here for over 100 years, so I suppose it can't be too bad.
Is there certain restrictions that you have to be careful of, like over in North America? Like there's certain things we're not allowed to talk about and stuff like that. Do you guys have limits like that too?
No, I think. Well, a big part of the Chiropractic law and the exam is knowing your legal rights.
Mm-hmm.
So there are certain things about what chiropractors are allowed to do. For example, they're allowed to inject glucose, but they're not allowed to inject insulin, because with glucose you can't kill anybody, but with insulin you can. So you need to know those kind of things. Although I'd never dream of it, injecting anybody with anything. But under the Chiropractic law, it's something that you're allowed to do. And those kind of things. There is a bit of an advertising thing. There is a bit of sort of saying you're not allowed to say, we can cure this, this, and this.
Mm-hmm.
But as a vitalistic chiropractor, that would never be anything that came out of my mouth anyway.
100%.
I enjoy testimonials, and I like testimonials. I think testimonials are very powerful, and I have no problem saying that, Susie, while under chiropractic care, happened to notice these improvements in her health and her life. You make your own conclusion.
Yeah.
But to advertise, to say, well, this is Chiropractic Constable and we cure X, Y, and Z, well, that would not be very favorably looked upon, though.
No, that's good. And like I said, if we're talking about vitalistic chiropractic, that's not what we do in the first place, right? So,
well, that's exactly right.
So cool. Tell me a little bit about the shift. So tell me a little bit about the shift of how, when you're practicing kind of a little bit more in that mechanistic model, and what was that kind of drove you a little bit more to that vitalistic?
Well, when I at Palmer, I was in clinic at Palmer. I was in Mod 3, and Mod 3 was known as the Voodoo Lounge at Palmer, because they were the techniques like SOT, Atlas Orthogonal, Nuka, the techniques that at the time were maybe a little bit sort of out there.
Yeah.
And the other two modules, Mod 1 and Mod 2, where you sort of more saw the Palmer package techniques, like, Diversified and Thompson and Gonstead and, these kind of techniques. And so it kind of started there a little bit. But when I went to Germany, the practice that I went into was a long-established practice. The guy was a 1970 or 1972 Palmer grad himself.
Yeah.
But he'd been in practice for a long time. He was very well known in town. And I think in his heart of hearts, he was also a vitalist. But being a chiropractic pioneer in a country, it's sort of it gets lonely, and I think we sort of end up on our own little island, and sort of bad habits kind of creep in there from time to time, I suppose. And if you have patient after patient after patient after patient who is born and raised in the medical model, and they just pummel you with that every day, it's very hard to sort of stand your ground and to stay your lane. So I think in that first practice, I kind of picked up a couple of I don't want to say bad habits. I think it's the wrong word, but maybe habits that weren't quite as vitalistic as they could have been. But it worked, and I was straight out of college. I'd never seen any other sort of practice, and I thought I was doing pretty good. I thought I was taking care of patients well. I thought I was seeing a pretty good number of patients. I thought I was because it is a business, money does play a role. I thought I was earning a pretty good amount of money and all that kind of stuff, and things were good. But sort of two things happened that they corresponded at the same time. One was I got to like my late 20s, early 30s, and I got home from work one day, from the office one day, and I'd only seen 25, 30 people in that day, which was normal for me at the time. And I was absolutely rooted. I was absolutely knackered, and my body hurt and my head hurt, and I was just exhausted. And I thought, hey, do I have to do this the next 30, 35 years? I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do it. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to make it. And that was sort of like, well, wow, what am I going to do here?
Yeah.
And the second thing was my father was diagnosed with colon cancer. And that was a big shock, because when I left Palmer and went to Germany, that was a big shock for Dad, because you remember I told you he came over for me when I started Palmer.
Yeah.
And then he went back a few days later, and I didn't see him again until he came over to graduation. So that was a good 3.5 years. And it was actually on graduation day that I said, look, Dad, sorry, but I'm not coming home with you to Australia. I'm going to Germany. I'm going to set up practice in Germany. And that really kind of broke his heart. That was a big sort of emotional hurdle for him. And so that's sort of, we didn't lose contact, but it was just something that he took a long, long time to get over. And it was really sort of about 5 years later that he sort of really sort of, was almost over it. And we'd arranged for him to come over to Germany. And I wanted him to see the practice that I was in. I wanted him to see the apartment that I had. I wanted him to see the car that I was driving. I wanted to see the life that I built for myself. And it was like 2 weeks before he was meant to come over, and we had like our call on the phone, and he said, look, I'm not coming. And I said, well, why? And he said, well, I've just been diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. And that was, of course, a huge shock. And when I heard that, though, I went straight into, that mechanistic, medipractic kind of mode. And, anything that I'd known and picked up over the years, I went into that. And, so I started sending him books and CDs and DVDs, and I ended up sending him like nutritional supplements and, all this kind of stuff. And funnily enough, even this, I forget what it's called, but I think it was literally called like black powder. And it was like some magic black powder from Canada that I sent. It cost me an absolute fortune, but I sent it to him anyway. And I sort of called him and I tried to coach him and I wanted to be updated on every step of the way and the whole thing. And Dad, when I got into chiropractic, Dad got into chiropractic too, and he went every sort of 2 weeks to his chiro, and that was okay. But when he was faced with this major health challenge, then he fell back into his old pattern and went right back into that medical model that he'd been indoctrinated with and raised upon. And I don't blame him for that because it's just the way he was brought up.
Yeah.
I mean, it was the way I was brought up as well. But he relied on the medical doctors and the opinion that he had, and I have to say that the medical team that took care of him was for that type of medicine and for that type of problem, they were top shelf, they were top notch, and he was in the hands of Australia's leading gastroenterological surgeon, and his oncologist was world class, was actually world renowned, an Australian oncologist, and he was operated upon where he lost most of his large intestine, and he was given a colostomy bag and the whole bit and the whole thing, and the chemotherapy and the radiation therapy and the whole thing. And like I said, I was just pounding him with all this stuff from my perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And then about 3 years later, he sort of fought for a good 3 years, and then one night, like about 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, his oncologist, the guy named Dr. Silva, called me, and I'd had a couple of phone conversations with him in the past, and he knew that I was a chiropractor, and he sensed that I wasn't stupid, and I knew what was going on, and so we had pretty open and frank conversations, and he said, "Look, Danny, if you ever want to see your dad alive again, you'd better get home now." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he goes, "Now." And so that was like 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, and like midnight, like 2 hours later, I was on the last flight out of Frankfurt, which happens to be a Melbourne flight. And I literally had no bags with me. I had like my wallet, a change of undies, like a carry bag, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
And I quickly called Mum saying I'm coming, and because Mum and Dad had no contact, and sort of informed Mum about what was going on. And so she was a bit shocked, and she met me at the airport 24 hours later, because Frankfurt to Melbourne is a 24-hour flight.
Wow.
And she picked me up, and we went straight to the hospice where he'd been moved, and eventually found him and didn't recognise him actually. In that I'd seen him about 6 months before. I'd visited Melbourne and Sydney for some reason, and I met up with him in Sydney, and he was still on chemo and radiation therapy, and he was really jaundicey because colon cancer has the tendency to metastasize to the biliary system.
Yeah.
And so his gallbladder and pancreas was, full of metastases and things like that. So it was quite jaundicey and yellow and a bit irritable, because the radiation therapy and chemotherapy, a side effect of that is skin irritation and itchiness and things like that. And he was like quite irritable and stuff. But he was, he was still, Dad, he was still like the old man. And then, but like 5 months later, I walked into his hospice room. I didn't recognize him. I did not recognize him. He was just skin and bones and just sunken into his bed. And the only thing I recognized him, because I talk about this when I've held talks, I've told this story. The only thing I recognized on him was his eyes, because my old man had sort of really intense eyes that just like looked right through you. And I spent the next 3 days and I didn't leave his side. And then like on the third day after I'd gotten there, I was just sitting there and like I said, my folks were divorced at the time. So Dad had a girlfriend, and her name was Anne. My mum's name is Jan. So Jan was in the cafeteria. Anne was out for a walk, and Dad and I were just sitting there. I think we're watching something stupid on the TV. Dad sort of dozed in and out of consciousness, and then at one stage he turned his head to me and he looked at me and he said, "Oh look, do you think you could adjust me?" And I talk about this in my talks, that it was literally the most ashamed I've ever been of myself in my entire life, because although I had a full academic scholarship to Palma, living in the States, for an Aussie family, it was not cheap. I had to start to pay rent, and I started to pay for food and this, that, and the other. And basically, for me to get to Palma, my folks took a second mortgage out on the family home, and the bulk of which Dad had to took over on a high school teacher's wage. So he'd sacrificed pretty much everything he had to get me to chiropractic school, and I hadn't even thought about checking him and adjusting him. It hadn't even entered my mind. Mm-hmm. And so when he asked me that question, I was just looking for a hole in the ground to swallow me up. But I said, yeah, of course I would. And And so, I actually adjusted him. I adjusted his atlas and his axis, and which was quite a surreal kind of experience, because he was, I don't know if you've had any experience with people in end-stage cancer, but he was stiff as a board. He was skin and bones, but he was stiff as a board. He was immovable. But his atlas and his axis just exploded when I adjusted them. But it took just this massive guttural breath when I did that. I've never heard that sound or seen that ever before. And when I let him go, I went back, ran to the side of the bed, and I sat down next to him, and I held his hand, and he sort of breathed for a couple of minutes, and then he turned over and he looked at me, and he said, "Thank you," and he rolled back into the middle and passed away. In that next breath, he passed away. And that was just a pretty pivotal, monumental kind of moment. And that's when I sort of figured out, there's more to chiropractic than just head pain, neck pain, back pain. There's more to chiropractic than seeing 20, 30 people a day with, neck pain and shoulder pain. There's something a little more profound there. There's something a little bit more magical there. There's something a little bit more spiritual there that I need to tap into. And that's when it started. That was the kickstart to the shift. And then the next sort of 2 or 3 years I spent traveling the world, looking at vitalistic practices, speaking with vitalistic people. And that's where I ran into, in no particular order, Billy D in California, Brad Glowacki in California, Dr. Fred Schofield in Phoenix, Arizona, Dr. Mark Hudson and Lynn McAvania in Spain. I know I've forgotten people or will forget people, and I apologize for that. But, all of these people, I just saw them practice and saw the way they lived and saw the way they spoke. And I said, that's what I've been looking for. Yeah. That's what I've been looking for. And so I spent the next sort of, 2 or 3 years trying to convert my practice into those kind of things. And it was dying 1,000 deaths, because I tell you, one of the hardest things in the world is changing a mechanistic office into a vitalistic office. It's a nightmare, man. Because, like I said, I was pretty established at the time. I'd been in practice, 8, 9, 10 years by that time. And like I said, I thought I had a good number of patients. I thought I was earning good money, and I was afraid of losing that. And I really I went into the chiropractic dumpster mode. And you know what the dumpster mode is, right?
No. Well, I probably do, but I don't know if you've just described it.
The dumpster mode is, if I change my practice, everyone's going to hate me and they're all going to leave me. I'm not going to earn any money. I'm going to be living in a dumpster.
Yes.
That's the chiropractic dumpster mode.
Yes.
Basically, the panic button, the fear mode. And I wanted to avoid that at all costs. So for, 2 or 3 very painstaking years, I converted a mechanistic office into a vitalistic office. And I can honestly say lost most of my patients, but I survived, and I kept a number of patients who've made the change with me. And interestingly, over the years, the old ones keep trickling back in as well. And so it's all been for the better. And now I'm in the smallest office that I've ever been in. I'm in 95 square meters. I have 3 adjusting bays with 5 tables, and we've never been happy. We've never seen more people. We've never seen more new patients. We've never had a better PVA. We've never had more collections or more profit. Any indicator that people use to measure success in chiropractic offices. We've never been healthier or more successful. So it's been great.
And in your energy, talk about the shift just personally for
unbelievable. That. I think that practice kind of shift, or where it was noticeable. I told you I saw like my 20, 30 people in that one day, and I just got home and I was wrecked.
Yeah.
And I think it was the day that I first saw 100 in a day. And at the end of that day, I'd finished the last person, and the next adjusting bay, no one was lying there. Yeah. And it was like this sense of disappointment. No one's there. What's going on? And I just sort of bounced out to the front desk, and I thought, hey, where's the next one? What's going on?
Yeah.
And it was in that moment, well, they said, well, you're done, you're finished. And that's when I noticed that energy level. I was just pumped up, ready to go. And I said, oh, so that's what this is all about. That's what this is, this is what's going on. And so that was sort of the first time where I noticed that difference in practice, that, because, I used to think, me seeing 20, 30 people a day and being absolutely wrecked, how are these people seeing 100, 150, 250 people a day. How are they physically, mentally doing that? I can't possibly fathom or imagine anybody doing that.
Yeah.
But like I said, when I went and saw, Dr. DeMoss and Dr. Glowacki and Dr. Schofield and Dr. Hudson in practice, they do it like they're in cruise control. It's unbelievable. But, what a lot of people don't realize is that, guys who practice at that level mostly doesn't happen overnight. And I regard them actually as like chiropractic athletes.
Yep.
That they've trained and worked really, really hard to get to that level that they're at. And so, that was a realization for me that made me feel better too, because making the decision that that's what you want and then actually getting there and achieving that, it's not like an overnight thing. It's something that you need to work on and train for, and that's what I've been doing ever since.
That's cool. So if someone was in that transition, so somebody listening, driving in their car, and they're like, you know what, I'd like to get that feeling where I have more energy. What kind of advice would you get for the first few steps to get into that transition?
Oh, that's hard, because I can't really do it in any particular order. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, first you got to do this, and then you got to do this, and then you got to do this. But I think that one of the first breakthroughs for me was actually deciding what you want.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because, it's your life, it's your career, it's your office, it's your people you're taking care of. It depends on what you want. So for a little while, I was a little bit tripped out on the number game, and people impressed me, the high number of people they saw.
Right.
But that changed for me. One, when I found out it was mostly all bullshit.
Yeah.
Which means, as much as I love the chiropractic profession and chiropractors, man, they're full of shit. Yeah. So, don't believe anything you hear. Just believe, things that you see for yourself.
Yeah.
So one of the things was, comparing myself with other people, and if people were, doing better in my eyes, or what I thought were doing better, that used to pull me down like crazy. And then one of my good friends in chiropractic, Dr. Bradley Rausch, he said, I heard him speak once, and he said, comparing yourself with other people is one of the biggest dream killers that I've ever experienced, and it's true. So that's why I say, the numbers game and the volume game doesn't really inspire me anymore. What inspires me is people finding out what they want. Yeah, having like a goal. This is the type of office that I want to have. And then working on and finding out and building a plan how they're going to achieve that office. And then with high focus and discipline, working that plan until they get there. That's something that sort of, that juices me really good. And I have respect for people who do that. So at the end of the day, the number of people you see doesn't really interest me, doesn't really bother me. But at the same time, I really hate wasted potential. Yeah, I love seeing people fulfill their potential. So just to use random numbers, if someone has the potential to be 100 a day person, 100 a day guy or girl, but they're seeing 20, 30 or 40 a day because they're comfortable or maybe a little lazy, that's really disappointing. But if someone is from their nature at 30, 40, 50 people a day, and that's their goal, and that's their plan, and that's their discipline, that's their focus, and that's their soft spot, that's where they're happy and healthy, perfect, man, not a problem, you're a friend of mine. And I think that's important, that people find out what they want. They make a plan, they work the plan, and they don't compare themselves with other people. And like you said at the start of our chat, people are on their own journey, they're on their own path, and even if they're on the same path, they're at different places on that path. So comparing yourself to other people is nonsensical. It's a huge waste of time and energy, and something we need to get over and put past us.
Now, again, this will probably be a little bit linked together with this answer too. But for you got those other group of chiropractors that might just feel plateaued or stagnant or a little bit burnt out. But they're doing good. They're paying the bills, kind of like how you were, you're kind of like, things are good. What kind of recommendations would you have for those guys, even though there's not the 1, 2, 3, 4?
Yeah. I think like one of the biggest things for me as well was also my private life. Because, with all due respect to my German girlfriend at the time, who's still a chiropractor here in Germany, and someone who I still have a lot of respect for, our private relationship at some stage was over. Yeah, it wasn't because anybody was bad or did anything bad or whatever. The time was just over. It was time to change. It was time to go. And so that was a holdback in a sense for both of us. And then the relationship I got into after that was in a lot of aspects great, but in the chiropractic aspect wasn't so great, simply because she simply wasn't interested in chiropractic.
Right.
Yeah. Which is okay, because chiropractic is not for everybody, although it is for everybody. But it just wasn't her thing. So going in that direction, but having someone in your life who's not towing the line is really energy sapping. Yeah?
Yes.
But thankfully, I was smart enough or lucky enough that the universe sent me the right woman, and I was smart enough to recognize that she was the right woman. So I very quickly put a ring on it and married her, and now I have I've never been happier in my private life than I ever have been before. I have a beautiful wife. I have 2 amazing children, and they're both totally on the chiropractic page. Like Coco, my wife, she works in the office whenever she can, and she's like the office manager, I suppose. She's the bookkeeper, the finance. Let's face it, she's the boss.
Yeah.
I
know all about that.
Yeah, exactly. And, she's in the office getting adjusted at least once a week. Our kids are in the office once or twice a week getting checked and adjusted. It's just like we've turned into a chiropractic family. Do you know what I mean? And,
yeah.
And the practice and the family life is like the center of our lives. And so there's no difference in energy level. There's no difference in emotional level. So that's why there's no energy drains anymore. There's no energy vampires anymore. Yeah. And because I think, the drain is not really, pushing on backs. Yeah. The drain is all of the stuff around it. And so, if you remove the noise and get everybody on the same page, then there's no real reason why you won't be juiced and full of energy. But of course, like I said, also, these guys that work at that high level, I see them as chiropractic athletes, and they behave and train like professional athletes as well.
Yep.
And there's a difference between hobby athletes like weekend warriors, and there's a difference between pro athletes. And and that's the same in chiropractic. There are weekend warrior chiropractors, and then there are professional A-grade chiropractors, and there's a world of difference. And a lot of that difference is the training and the discipline that they do. So, during my change and my transformation, my daily routine in the office and outside of the office has changed as well. Yeah. Whether that's meditation, or whether that's family time, like focused family time, or whether that's my present time consciousness or my focus in the office. Yeah. That changes sort of big time. And it was Dr. Fred Schofield who changed my mindset when he said, look, you have to be like, have the mindset of a professional athlete. And living here in Germany, I'm a Bayern Munich fan. And he tapped into that pretty quickly. And he said, you have to have the Bayern Munich mentality. And here in Germany, Bayern Munich literally don't lose. Yeah, they win title after title after title after title. And they're in like at least the semi-final of the Champions League, like almost every year. There's just like, they're just like a winner club. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And it's the mentality. Whenever you see it from the CEO down to the guy who cleans the boots, they all have the same mentality. It's just like this focus winner mentality. And it was Dr. Fred Schofield who sort of changed my mentality with that. So, when I walk in the office nowadays, it's game on. It's game face on, game on, bang, let's go. Mm-hmm. And when I walk in that door, it's like, the start whistle. And then when I leave that door, then it's like the end of game whistle. And, any time in between there, it's game on. And I'm there to win. And I'm there to win with, every patient encounter that I have. And that kind of makes it fun too. Do you know what I mean? Because, it's kind of like, because, you know how it is as well. I'm sure every chiropractor experiences that. 9,999 patients out of 10,000, are not brought up in our model. Yeah,
Totally.
So they will pummel you with their medical model and with their headaches, neck aches, and back aches, and all day, every day. And I take that as a challenge. I thought, I'm gonna get this guy. I'm gonna change this guy. Like with this adjustment right now, we're gonna change it. Yeah, and I take that as like a competition every time, and that just sort of helps with the focus and helps with the energy and helps with the fun as well.
That's awesome. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, we're getting close to our time. So I always like to end. I know it just flew by. It was like, but I always like to end with having my guests, take the floor and just give some words of advice or something that's on your mind to share with the underdog nation out there who might feel like they're underdogs or feel like they're knocked down or feel like they're a little bit stale in their life, and see if you have any parting words of wisdom for the people out there.
I hate doing this interviews because I don't want to sound like the knowing prop, because that's by far and away not the case. But I think the theme of the chat, Don, has been one, decide what you want, and two, go for it, and don't worry about what anyone else is thinking or saying or doing. Yeah. And don't compare yourself with other people, because everyone's on their own journey and everyone's at their own spot on their journey, and it just doesn't matter. And whether it's in school, because like I said, I was a straight A university student. I was a magna cum laude Palmer grad. Do you know how many people in 18 years of practice have asked me about my grades?
Zero.
Not one. Nada. It just doesn't matter. Like when people pass on, they're not remembered for how many people they saw or how much money they made or how fast their car was or how big their house was. They're not remembered for that stuff. They're remembered for the people that they were. You know what I mean? They're remembered for the people who loved them. Yeah. Mm-hmm. They're remembered by their husband or wife that they left behind, by their kids who they left behind. Yeah. By their friends and family they left behind. Yeah. Chiropractic is great. Chiropractic is, it's who I am. It's my passion. It's my life. But life itself is bigger than that. Do you know what I mean? Like, get over yourself, calm down, relax a little bit, and focus on the important stuff. Do you know what I mean? Be healthy, love somebody, let somebody love you, have kids, raise a family, grow up a little bit. It's cool. Just relax and be cool. And then, do your thing, and not too much can go wrong.
That's awesome. Well, thanks, brother. I appreciate you being on the podcast.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, that was great. Like, love the stories and the insights too. So everybody, chill out. And don't forget, like always, to crush the curse. Thank you for listening to the podcast. If you receive value from this episode, please take some time to rate and review us on iTunes or your favorite place to listen to podcasts. If you know a fellow chiropractor that could benefit from this message, please share it with them. Because it's my goal to provide you with great content, please contact me if you have any questions at drdonmcdonald.com or find me on Facebook. I look forward to hearing from you. So until next time, Dr. Don out.